Thanks everyone for joining. Um, my name is Jesse Spevack, and I'm gonna talk to you all about some observations that I've made or that I've noticed climbing various engineering hierarchies, most recently at a company called Stripe, which I'll get into in a second. But just I want to give a quick intro. I'm a 1606 backend alum. As I mentioned, I work at a company called Stripe, which builds financial infrastructure to grow the GDP of the internet. Maybe some of you have used Stripe or integrated with Stripe. Basically, everybody has used Stripe if you've run your credit card on the internet. Before Stripe and before Turing even, I was an educator. I was saying that to Agnes, but that was a long time ago at this point. So all that's to say that like everything, mileage is going to vary here. Everything I say in this talk is my opinion. I'm not trying to represent my past, current, or future employers. And I'm going to go into a little bit more about my experience because you'll see, like, I haven't really worked on like a two-person dev team in a very, very long time. And so mileage is going to vary. So take all this with a grain of salt. This is just my opinion, dude, as they say. I think that the people who are going to get the most out of this talk are folks who are currently employed as early to mid career devs. And I know that I've seen a lot of talks at Turing and read a lot of stuff in Slack, and I think there's a lot of good stuff out there about finding your first job or finding even your next job. It's been it's been almost 3 years since I've gone through a job search. So I don't have any recent information about that. And that's not what this talk is going to be about. This is more about you're in a dev role and you want to get to the next level, which, I think that's kind of the goal here. So even if you're just starting out, like even if this is just your first job and maybe you've only been there for a few months and this is very early in your career, I still think that this will be useful for you because I think it'll demystify a few things. It's like, if you think back to when you were in Turing, when we were all in Turing as a Mod 1 student, it's really hard to imagine like what after Mod 1 kind of looks like, but it is a good idea to get in touch with the Mod 2 students and like see what they're doing. So I think that this can kind of have that. If you come to this talk with that lens, I think that will be helpful. So let's talk about what we're going to do. So I'm going to go through my career history very quickly, just so, again, to like build that context, because mileage will vary. And if your context is very, very different than mine, maybe this won't be that useful. I'm going to talk about what I think of as a senior engineer, what I think the definition should be, because there's a lot of definitions out there. It means a different thing in basically every company. So let's like align on that. Then I'm going to get into the meat of the talk, which is going to be about like how to work as a senior engineer. And even if you're not a senior engineer, if you start working like the first step to become a senior engineer is to actually like work like a senior engineer. And what I suspect is going to happen by the end of the talk is that like some of you are going to realize like, oh, I already do all these things. Actually, I should be a senior engineer. Let me go like talk to my manager right now. So that's kind of what we're aiming for. We'll hold some time at the end for questions, as Jeff said. If you need to, you can use the Zoom chat as like a scratch pad. And at the end, I'll try to remember to go through the Zoom chat and kind of like knock off those questions first. Okay. So let's go into some career history. So again, this is just to say that these are my opinions and here's how I came to those opinions. So in 2017, I finished Turing. I started a company called Ibotta. I don't know exactly how many developers from Turing work at Ibotta now. I want to say there's like 20. I'm not on the Slack anymore, so I can't like get the exact count, but it's definitely a great place to have a career. I think I was the first Turing grad to start at Ibotta. I joined as an engineer. My official title was engineer. It wasn't associate engineer. It wasn't junior engineer. It was just engineer. And at the time, Ibotta had about 30 developers. And so there were only two job titles, engineer and senior engineer. And I thought that at the time, like coming straight out of Turing, I thought that senior engineers were like people who were not approachable and not understandable at all. So like I kind of thought that your seniority was like inversely correlated with your approachability and understandability. And like as an example, um, like my favorite senior engineer from that era of of Ibotta was a Russian guy named Alex, and he was in my interview for my take home project. Like I had a take home project that I had to do, and then his job was to grill me on all the decisions I made. And he asked like in a very thick Russian accent, like, why didn't you optimize that query? And he's just grilling me, and I'm like sweating. And when I when I finished that interview, I told my wife, I was like, I'm really sorry, honey, like did not get the job. But apparently Alex liked me, and he became kind of my mentor. Uh, but all that's to say, I rarely understood what he was talking about, and basically found him completely inapproachable because he was always very angry or seemed very angry. Okay, so 2.5 years later, after being scarred by Alex, I I got promoted to be a senior engineer. A year and a half after that, I was promoted to be a staff engineer at Ibotta, and then a year later, so now we're in October of 2021. I joined Stripe as an engineer, and so it's common when you change, and maybe some of you have had this experience, but it's common to title change when you move between companies. And so, and just a little more on Stripe. Stripe, like many tech companies, uses levels with numbers to designate like where you are in the employment hierarchy. So at the time I was hired, so 2021, so it's 4 years, 4.5, it was 4.5 years of engineering experience. I was an L2, which is one more than the lowest you can be at Stripe. So L1 is kind of what they call new grads, people who are recent college grads who get hired at Stripe. So I was an L2. And some of you may be like, wait, what? You were a staff engineer and now you're an L2? Like that doesn't make any sense. So this is just kind of a way to think about title changes. You can kind of trade title for prestige, desirability of a company. And I'm not saying that I'm not saying that Ibotta is not a prestigious place. I'm saying that Stripe is much more well known than Ibotta. So I made the trade of title for a more well known company, and as a result, it was reasonable for me to get a title decrease. Now I also got a salary increase, so I think you can command find that information in Slack at Turing if you're curious. But this is like very common. It's a way for kind of so actually before I say that, let me go give you the counter example. The tech lead, the next engineer up from me, who I work most closely with, he spent over 10 years at Google, and he left Google for Stripe. So that's kind of like the other direction in terms of like size of company, how well known it is. And he did that in part to get a title increase, right? So his title, he went from Google to Stripe and got a title increase, whereas I went from Ibotta to Stripe and got a title decrease. So this is just one way that smaller, growing, riskier companies can attract talent from much larger, more stable companies. So that's the context there. So now back to my very interesting career. In 2023, so this was last year, yeah, just over a year ago, I was promoted to L3, level 3, which is a senior engineer. And at this point, I've been a full-time software developer for 6 years. And I had, before that, worked in education for 10 years. So 16 years of professional experience. And so all this is to say that I'd been promoted to senior engineer twice. And kind of now I'm going to dive into what a senior engineer is. Thanks for humoring me on that. And also, I think this is the L3, L2 thing is useful. I'm sure that there are folks on here who are like, oh, I've seen some jobs on Stripe, and maybe Jesse can get me those jobs. We should talk about that, but this is the context. Like, I graduated Turing 4.5 years ago and got hired as L2, and then spent another year and a half or 2 years getting promoted to be L3. So just think about that in the context of like how much experience you have. Okay, so let's talk about what a senior engineer is. I stole this graph from the Pragmatic Engineer, pragmaticengineer.com. So one way to think about a senior engineer is to kind of think about two axes, the axes of scope, the scope of what you work on, and your influence. How far can you influence? So a new grad, someone maybe fresh out of Turing, will get tasks assigned to them, and they basically won't influence anyone but themselves. They can control what they work on. They can control themselves. Now, moving up to a senior engineer, the way that I'm going to define it for the purpose of this talk is that your scope is a project level. You have a project that typically more than one person is going to be working on, and your influence level is across your entire team. So your entire team sees you as a leader, or that you have some kind of like what's the word? Not it's like informal authority over the team. Now, if you go the next level up, a staff engineer. A staff engineer is someone who's in charge of an entire product, or potentially like an entire technology team, depending on the size of the team of the company, and kind of has influence across many teams. So that's a way to think about that. So like at Ibotta, I think when I was a senior, and I'm not trying to throw shade here. I was never really like exercising true project level scope in my work as a senior engineer. When I got to be a staff engineer at Ibotta, I think I was, but that just goes to show that like titles mean different things in different places. So now we're aligned. When I say senior engineer, we're talking about project level scope and influence across the team. There's another way to think about it. So we can also graph influence, that same kind of influence, who listens to you, versus independence. So on the influence, like who listens to you, is it just yourself? Is it just some of your teammates who like you? Is it the whole team listens to you, many teams, or like an entire group of teams or company? And independence is kind of like how long does does the person that you report to kind of trust you to work without really checking in? Like how long of a leash do you have? If you're a new grad on my team, like maybe I'll go 1 week, and that would be a lot. Like I would have to really trust you. Maybe I'll go a week before checking in to make sure that like you haven't fallen into a rabbit hole. As a senior engineer, I think that the definition I want to put forward is that you're going to be able to be trusted to work for several months, if not, up till almost a year. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean you're not talking to your manager for a year, but that's kind of the scope of independence you're given. Like, here's this problem. I think it's going to take Jesse roughly 6 months to solve this. Like, that's kind of senior engineer territory, in my opinion. Okay, so I'm sure that those are totally uncontroversial, and everybody's in total agreement with what I consider to be a senior engineer. So we can move on. What do I do as a senior engineer? So now I'm going to give you kind of like, I think this is going to be the most valuable part of the talk. I'm going to share kind of like a principle, like a high level principle that I think about. And then I'm going to work my way into like more and more concrete detail of this is actually how I do things that bubble up to be that principle. So the first principle is ownership. And I think that this is something that folks earlier in their career struggle with a lot. So ownership is this idea that this is actually my problem to solve, and I have agency there, and like it's on me to figure this out. let's go over like some failure modes here. And the first one, and I only know these because I've done them. So the first failure mode here is complacency. So this is like when you're waiting to be told what the next step is. It's like, okay, I did Jira task 1 and I don't see Jira task 2, so I'm just going to sit here and wait for someone to tell me what to do. That is not what a senior engineer does. That shouldn't be what any of you do. And like, basically, like, you have to put yourself in the headspace of the person you report to. Like, probably more than one person reports to them, and the thing you're working on may be the most important thing on their plate, but it also may not be. And they are going to they're they're going to be negatively surprised if when you check in with them and they're like, okay, where are you at on this? And you say, oh, I was just waiting for you to tell me the next thing to do. That's not what you want to say. You get paid to solve their problems, to take stress off their plate and handle it. And the more you can do that and the more proactive you can be about that, the better. So complacency is the first failure mode for not showing ownership. The second way you might fail to show ownership is by solving the wrong problem. And this is like, I think, extremely common for new engineers, because when you get a problem and you can solve it as a new engineer, it's like, oh my God, I can do something. Like, I should do it. And there's this bias to like, it's like you don't believe you can do something. And so when you finally see that you can do something, you're like, oh, I better do it. Well, you got to make sure that it's actually the most important thing for you to be doing at that time. So if here's a good heuristic for this. So Bill from support comes to you and it's like, hey, I just need you to remember that migration you ran, or remember this thing that you did. Like, could you do that again? Or I have this problem. Can you solve it for me? Whatever. Okay. So like the way to evaluate that is end of the week when you're checking in with your boss and you say to your boss, hey, the thing that we agreed I was going to finish, I did not finish because I was helping Bill from support do this other thing. If you think that your boss is going to be like, awesome, great move, then you can help Bill. But if you are going to dread having that conversation and dread having to tell your boss that, hey, that main thing that you told me to get done, I didn't get done because like Bill kind of sniped me, then don't do the thing for Bill. You have to solve the right problems, right? So just doing stuff isn't senior engineer level. Doing the right things is senior engineer level. Okay, the third failure mode, and this one is really hard. This is the hardest one, is what to do when you're stuck. So less experienced engineers tend to not show ownership by getting stuck and prematurely asking for help. So it's like, you haven't, and the impression that you give other people when you do this is, wow, Jesse really didn't do his homework, because if he had just like put that exact question into Google, he would have the exact answer. So giving up prematurely is gonna show that you don't really own the problem. Like, you're not taking responsibility for the problem. The flip side of that is when you're stuck and you're really stuck and you don't flag it soon enough, that's also going to show that you're not really showing ownership, because you're letting too much time slide between like producing value on that problem. So I think it's probably more typical for less experienced engineers to fall into the like asking prematurely, but there's the flip side of that, of not soon enough, and that's equally, maybe even more. I don't know, I'm not going to pass judgment here. They're both not great. Okay, so how do you actually show ownership? We have three ways that don't show ownership. This is how you actually show ownership. So the first is you need to actually do the work. And I think that like this is like the closest I will get into like a technical talk here. I'm not going to show any code or anything like that, but like you actually do need to be able to code, right? And you need to have like good intuitions about design. And you will, I think that most of that, honestly, I think comes from Turing. Right? Like Turing trains us pretty well. And the rest of that intuition will come from, just experience on the job and seeing I guess like having to live with the consequences of the decisions that you make in code, and realizing like, oh, I did that once. I didn't like the outcome. I'm not going to do it again. So you actually have to do the work here. I think a superpower that I've seen that I'm trying to grow in myself and I've seen in other folks who I admire is this ability to persevere through the discomfort of uncertainty. This is the thing that we get paid for. Someone gives us a problem and there's a lot of uncertainty around it. And our ability to kind of live in that space of like, I don't know how to do it exactly. I'm not even sure what the next step is, and just kind of muddle our way and make the problem more concrete and make the steps more clear. That is very difficult. And the better you get at that, the higher you will go in your career. There's a couple ways that I think some of you probably already know how to do this, but I'll just kind of try to give a few bullet point tips here. Obviously, break the problem down. That's like taught in Mod 1. Break it down into small pieces. So like instead of I need to build a system that does X, Y, and Z, maybe it's just how do I get Z done or how do I get X done? And then maybe you're not even ready to figure out like how I'm going to do X. So an even smaller thing is like, all right, what are all the questions that I have about X? Right? Let me just list all the questions I have. And then, the next thing I need to do after I list all those questions is I'm going to read the docs about X, and then I'm going to read the code that references X, right? And as you do that, you start building this more concrete picture. And that's kind of like you like wading through that really uncomfortable position of not knowing what you're doing. Because really that is going to that has characterized all my time as an engineer. Okay, the next thing that I think shows ownership as a senior engineer is this idea of push-ups. So, so think about if you've never done a push-up, or if you haven't done a push-up in a couple of years. When you do one push-up, it's going to suck. It's going to be hard. Okay. If you decide I'm going to do one push-up every single day for a week, at the end of the week, that last push-up you do is still going to suck. It's still going to be hard. But if you do one push-up every day for a year, at the end of the year, if you don't do a push-up, you're actually going to feel weird. Like your body's going to be like, wait, something's wrong. I should be doing a push-up. So a push-up, like if you do this routine, like push-up doesn't matter. It's the things that the push-ups enable you to do that matter, right? So now when you go traveling and you have to move your luggage around, that's a lot easier. And when you want to pick up your kids because you want to give them a hug, that becomes a lot easier. When you want to put your groceries away, that becomes easier if you're doing push-ups. So this kind of like trivial task, which is uncomfortable, not that fun, enables you to do actually things that are important in your day-to-day life. So as a senior engineer, you should be finding opportunities to do push-ups in your job, and you should be doing them every day. So let's go over like some examples of what that might look like. Maybe that is cleaning up logs. Like it's not fun. You don't want to do that, but it's gonna make subsequent work easier for you. The goal here is that you're finding these tasks in your job that in and of themselves are kind of annoying, but you're doing them to give yourself reps so that when it comes time to actually do something more important, it's like you are ready to go, like you're spring loaded. All right. We kind of talked about this as a failure mode, but the next way to show ownership is getting getting stuff done. And specifically, you need to get the right things done. So now I want to get into like a more concrete example of how I make sure that I'm doing the right things. And I think this is something that everybody here can adapt. So one thing I do is I keep a public stack rank. And a stack rank is just a fancy way to say to-do list, but it makes you sound like a senior engineer. So I have this public stack rank, and everybody in my company can see it. My manager can see it. All my coworkers can see it. And it's a to-do list where at the top of the list is the things that I'm currently working on. Maybe there's 3 things that I'm currently doing. And that way, when Bill from support comes to me and says, hey, could you do this thing? Could you help me with this? I really need your help. It's super important. I can look at that list and run that heuristic in my head. Is what Bill's asking me more important than these 3 things that I actually need to get done? And if so, great. Bill's thing goes to the top of my stack rank and I can put it in and get it done. If not, put it lower in the list. Put it somewhere where it makes sense. This allows you to be much clearer with Bill about when you can get things done by. Maybe Bill should find someone else to do it. Maybe Bill's okay with you doing it in a week. If you're not sure, right? Like, if you're not sure, is what Bill's at, like, it sounds really important what Bill's asking. I'm not actually sure. Is this actually going to tank the company if I don't do it? Ask Bill, right? Show Bill your stack rank because it's public. Hey, these are the 3 things that I'm working on right now. I think they're taking up all my time. Where do you think what you're asking falls into this, right? And have a conversation about it. Okay, so public stack rank, that is one concrete thing you can do to show ownership. All right, the next thing that you can do is this idea of saw sharpening. So if you are a lumberjack, which I have a lot of experience in, and you want to cut a lot of wood, you need to use your saw, right? But over time, like you're cutting logs, cutting wood, whatever, your saw becomes dull. It loses its ability to cut over time. The amount of wood you can cut per unit of time decreases. So at some point, you need to stop cutting wood and you need to sharpen your saw so that you can like continue to cut wood. So sharpening your saw is a secondary productivity task. It's not cutting wood, but it does allow you to cut wood, and you have to find the balance there of like, if you're only sharpening your saw, you're not going to cut any wood. If you never sharpen your saw, you're going to cut some wood and then you're never going to cut wood again. So you need to find like the right balance there. I think all good engineers do some type of, or have some practice of saw sharpening. So for example, when you're first starting out, maybe you notice, oh, this is a command that I always run like every single day, and I never remember what it is. It's like, okay, cool. I'm going to just like make a little shortcut in bash RC or whatever to make that little task easier. It's these little time-saving things that you can do. As a senior engineer, think back to like the scope and influence graph. Like, those saw sharpening techniques shouldn't just affect you. They should affect your entire team. They should be things that benefit your entire team. So these are things like repackaging files to make sure that like code ownership is super clear, automating common team tasks, like responding to questions in Slack, like setting up Slack bots and things like that. Another thing is like more like academic, more abstract. Like, you want to be able to bring ideas to your team. You want to like have like some, I don't know, maybe my experience is I don't have a ton of unique ideas. I kind of like am an aggregator of ideas that I can bring to my team. And so the way that I do that is by reading a lot. So internally, I read a lot of docs. I read a lot of design docs. I read ship docs. So ship docs are like what a team puts out to celebrate that they've just like shipped a feature. I read meeting notes, and most of the time I just kind of like, this is just like good to know. But sometimes it's like, oh, this really relates to this thing that my teammate is working on. I wonder if they know about this, and I can like make that connection for them. Another thing that I recommend for saw sharpening and like generating ideas and like pulling ideas in for your team is find your industry mentors. So you should have like a list of people that you can kind of rattle off of like, these are people that I kind of follow. And like when they say stuff, when they write stuff, when they put videos out or whatever, I tune in because it's going to teach me something. So find those people. The next way to show ownership, this is popular at Turing, is this idea of mentorship. When you are showing ownership as a senior engineer, it's not enough for you to own just your work. You don't get paid for just your own work. Like your scope is your team level, or your influence is team wide. So you get paid to increase the impact of everyone on your team. So how do you actually go about mentoring as a senior engineer? So this I got from my teaching days. So you can have a graph of standards and expectations. You could have high standards, low standards, high expectations, low expectations. So like, for example, low standards, an example of low standards would be like, we'll ship it in 12 months or just ship it right now, whatever, it's probably fine, right? Those are kind of low standards for quality. High standards for quality means that we care about our users. We care about our craft. We're not going to just ship anything. It has to be good. We want our users to be delighted by what we ship. Okay, low expectations. This is an engineer. They're just not smart. They're lazy. Oh, it just takes so long to do anything in our code base. It's such a ball of mud, bowl of spaghetti, whatever. Okay, low expectations for what we can get done. High expectations for what we can get done, or for the people around us, are that the engineer is smart, they're hardworking, they try their best, right? So you want your mentorship to be firmly in that top first quadrant where you have high standards, you expect a lot, like you have high, the bar is high for what you want to be produced, and your expectations that the person can do it are also in line with that. Okay, if you can keep your mentorship in that box, if you're not, then I think you're going to have a productive mentoring relationship. So there are a couple ways that I actually try to do that. I have one-on-ones with my teammates, all my teammates. And what we do is we like discuss their work and their challenges. I want to hear from them. I want to hear like, hey, what are you working on? What's hard about it? Sometimes I offer advice. I probably offer more advice than I should. But I really try to lead with questions. I try to ask questions because again, if you have to always tell the person what to do, then you're not building their capacity. You can ask questions and that can help build their capacity to kind of solve their own problems. And as you do this, you're going to increase like the capacity of your team. You're going to make it so more of your teammates can do your current job so that you can figure out how to do your next job. How are we doing on time? We want to be finished at 50?
Yeah. Oh, yep. You've got about 14 minutes left.
Okay, let's see. Let me go 4 more minutes so that we have 10 minutes for questions. But I swear I did this last night and it took me 20 minutes. And now I'm like barely halfway through. So, all right, here's the next one. Here's the next abstract principle. We did ownership. We went through some concrete examples of what that looks like, what it doesn't look like, how to do it. Now here's the next one. This is like, I like this one. Transparency. Okay. Transparency is the armor of the competent. Okay. If you are competent, right, showing your work just reinforces that point. The only reason not to be transparent is if you're hiding something, right? Like if you don't think that what you're doing is good. So transparency, I think, is a huge part of being a senior engineer. And a big part of transparency is writing. So I write a lot. There are a lot of different forms of writing that you can take on and make a part of your regular practice as a senior engineer. The first one that I'll pitch, I think, is probably the weirdest one. So I'll pitch this one and then maybe we'll dive into questions. Notes, okay? Keep a weekly note stock and write everything in it. And just like your stack rank, guess what? This isn't a private note stock. This is a public note stock. Everybody should be able to see this. You're being transparent. This is exactly what I'm thinking about right now. This is what I'm wondering. This is what I'm working on. Okay. Why should your notes be public? Your notes should be public because this is like a hack that I use on myself. And so maybe this says more about me than a senior engineering or you. But the hack is that like if if there's even a chance that one other person is going to read this, I put in like 100 times more effort than I would if it was like just something I was jotting down on a piece of paper on my desk. So that level, that like enforcement of rigor and accountability, I think makes it so you're actually doing better thinking, which is what we get paid for. So a common question is like, well, what if I don't know what's appropriate to write publicly? And public, I mean like within your team or within your company. So if you cannot think of what you can write that's appropriate for that audience about what you are currently doing, then the question is, should you be doing that thing? Okay. Like if you don't have if you can't translate it into a note that's appropriate for that audience, it's probably a signal that maybe that's not the most important thing to be working on, or even the right thing to be working on. So I find like that enforcement of rigor and that enforcement of, is this actually what I should be doing right now, is very helpful for public notes, for keeping public notes. So just the mechanics here with 1 minute, and then we'll go into questions. The mechanics here is you want to find a template that works for you for your notes. So like you're not reinventing this every week. At the end of the week, you can send out your notes like to an email, to like your team, to an internal blog, anything like that makes sense in your context. I think that's all I want to say. I actually have a lot more to say about notes, but I think I'm going to pause there. So why don't we pause? Actually, sorry, one more thing about notes. If you actually do this, this will subsume the need for your brag doc, right? Because you have this running list of here's everything I've done. And instead of having to write a performance review, instead of writing your performance review as like a constructive act, a generative act, it is just an editing act where you're just pulling in the things that you've already written down. And that's way less stressful, way easier. Okay, let's pause there. I'm going to open up the chat. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to open up the chat and see what questions we have.
One that I was like kind of holding for you just was from Gavin. I'm just going to reply to it. I think that'll make it show up to at the bottom of your chat. It's from 2:20 p.m. I've got a product person. 12 minutes.
I'm not sure I'm seeing it.
Oh,
oh, I see. I've got a product person that defines priorities for the team. How do you balance being proactive about problems, features versus making sure your priorities are aligned with the product decision makers, upper level management? Yeah. Okay. So great question. Okay. Sounds like you work with like an annoying product person. No. I think that there are a couple things to do. One is meet with this product person, figure out how they're thinking about their job, figure out what their goals are, and get on the same page with them so that you can make their job easier. I had an experience kind of similar. It was not a product person, it was a design person, where it's like the design person was creating kind of these Figma designs, and it's like, wait, what? How are we doing that? Why are you telling me to do this? And a lot of that was just like not being aligned on what our goals were. And we had this kind of really powerful conversation where we had a series of meetings where it was like, I feel like we're in tension right now. I feel like we're just not vibing. Had the one-on-one, and at the end of the one-on-one, I was like, hey, like, her name's Shelby. It's like, Shelby, what's your goal here? Like, what's the goal? And she was like, I want to ship stuff. And I was like, damn, that's my goal too. Like, I want to ship things too. Let's figure out how to do that together. And that kind of like brought us into harmony. So find those ways to create harmony, and hopefully that will help with this product person. Jeff, do you want to give more guidance, or should I go with Alexa? Or
Yeah, I think Alexa.
okay, take it away, Alexa.
I was gonna type this, but then I didn't feel like typing, so I didn't. But anyway, right now I'm working so this is my first job out of Turing, just a little bit of background. I've been here about 9 months and it's a really tiny company. There's 5 engineers total. And so because of that, even though like I have no experience essentially, aside from Turing and this, I'm doing a lot of like those things that you defined as like kind of a quote unquote senior engineer, even though I don't have that experience. And then my question with that is that eventually I'm like loosely looking, but would really like to move into a different company. And just with the intention to get more mentorship and grow. I don't think that I will be able to grow in the way I want to in my career at this company. So what advice would you have taking the experience that I'm getting that kind of, because it's such a tiny company, goes across all of these levels? Like, how can I apply that to looking for, my next job with the intention to eventually grow into like a more senior or leadership oriented position at a larger company?
That is a difficult question because it's not something I have much experience doing.
Okay.
Uh, I think that okay, so here's what I'm hearing, and this is like something that I think is good to like summarize for the whole group. So you might be a senior engineer if your scope and influence is at that kind of senior engineer space, like you're leading projects, you're influencing a team, you're working autonomously for many months at a time. It sounds like maybe you're doing that at this point. You might be a senior engineer, right? If you are showing ownership, if you are saying, this is my problem to solve, I'm going to do the work, I'm going to get the right things done, I'm going to keep my saw sharp, I'm going to mentor my team. Maybe you're already doing that, right? And then I'm also going to be super transparent. In fact, the more transparent I am because I do such good work, the better I look and the more impact I can have. So if you're doing those things, I think and this is just my opinion, and I think if you're doing those things, you might be a senior engineer already. And then the question is like, how do you translate that in the job search? I think part of that is going to be through your network and through networking with other people. If you only have 5 people who are consuming like all your great ideas and mentorship, think about a way to expand that. Like, do you have a blog? Are you writing some of your insights for the public? I just posted a write up about stack ranks, and like a bunch of people from other companies were like reaching out about, hey, do you have a template for that? But, this is a way to put yourself out there and like let people know like, hey, I'm really good at this. What else? Let's do one more question.
Jesse, can I add one, just a little piece on there?
Yeah,
Like
you
something,
probably have a lot more expertise on this than I do.
um, I think a challenge in this industry is, especially as junior level, early career folks, you're probably managed by relatively novice managers. It is very likely that you are one of the first people that they have managed. They used to do your job, they were good at your job, and then someone was like, "Hey, be in charge of people who do that job. There's no training whatsoever. Good luck." And so it's not uncommon that folks can feel frustrated with the management they get, or kind of the opportunities open to them. When am I going to get a promotion? When am I going to get a raise? When am I going to up level? Right. And I think that's true across a lot of industries, but it's very pronounced in this one. One of the things I always push back when when I talk to grads who have been out for 18 months or 2 years, they're like, oh, I'm thinking about going to a new company. And it's like, okay, why? Well, I don't have the opportunities here. I'm not getting what I want. Okay, okay. How have you told anybody? Well, and it's like, did you tell them what you want? And often the answer is like, well, yeah, kind of. I mentioned it like 6 months ago. It's like, you got to tell them what you want. And I think particularly for novice managers, I try and push people like give them an opportunity to manage, not by reading your mind, but by doing what you want. And so like when you want more responsibility, you can't wait for it. You know, when you want a promotion, you can't wait for it. Like, no, one of the great rules of life is no one is thinking about you nearly as much as you think they are, right? And that includes your manager. So, like, give them the opportunity to manage. And coming back to what Jesse was talking about, like brag books and diaries and so forth. And if you walk into an evaluation, or if you sometimes have to be the one to prompt your manager and be like, hey, I've been here a year. Can we do a yearly eval? And they'll be like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. And then you're like, I think it'd probably be like 50 minutes. If you don't mind, I'll bring some materials. Maybe I'll send it to you ahead of time. They're gonna be like, okay. And then you come in and you're like, I did this. Boom, boom, boom. Here's feedback I got from teammates. Boom, 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 boom. Here's like all the tickets I completed. Here's all of this. They're gonna be like, oh shit. And then when you're like, okay, I need this specific raise. I need this responsibility. I wanna start mentoring these other new people, whatever. Then they make it easy for them to say yes. If you can make it easy for someone to say yes, they're very likely to do it. All right, shut up. Back to just.
Yeah, make it easy for people to say yes. That is something I'm working on right now with my own manager, and thinking of like about 6 months ago I was like, hey, we should like do this project, and like I should be in charge of it, and these are the people who should work on it with me. And it didn't go that way, and I realized like I need to do a better job of making it so it's just easy for him to say yes, right? Like set it all up, get it all going. All you need to do is say yes. So I think that's good advice, Jeff. Um, Okay, I have a few requests in the last minute. So if you found this useful or not, I would love it if you'd take a look at my website, newsletter, blog, very normal info, verynormal.info. I write about tech, sometimes politics, sometimes my family. It's just kind of like old school. This is my website. And I need accountability, because apparently if I don't have a public audience, I can't get a single rigorous thought down. So that's number one. I'd appreciate that. Second, please Slack me in Turing any feedback you have. What landed here? Where do you think I missed the mark? I would appreciate that. Also, even better, like if you want to do that, but then some, like write and share your takeaways and share it with the entire Turing community. That's even better. That's senior engineer level. And then the last thing is pay it forward, right? Like the whole purpose of Turing is to unlock human potential. It's to, get a diverse group of students into high fulfillment technical careers. But that's not just on the staff, like that's on all of us. So if this landed for you in some way, if this helped you in some way, please make sure that in whatever way you can, you're also paying it forward. So that's what I got. Appreciate everybody's time. Thanks for inviting me, and I'll see you all later.